up, swashbucklers? You're listening to Under the Crossbones, episode number 161. My name is Phil Johnson. I'm your host for the show each and every week. Thank you for tuning in and telling your friends and visiting sponsors and sending donations and posting on Facebook, doing all that cool stuff that you do. That helps me keep the old boat afloat. I appreciate it. I have an amazing show for you today. Amazing. It's fantastic. You are absolutely going to love this show. I'm coming to you from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, where I'm doing shows this week. I actually have a couple of nights off here, and then I'm back at it on the stage here in Edmonton. Show's been great. I always love playing Edmonton. The people here are so fun, and it's been a good run to help me work out the kinks, the last few kinks from this new hour that I've been working on, and we're trying to get it together. We're gonna film it in the spring. It's gonna be fantastic. I'm having a really good time here. I'm gonna go visit the giant mall today. Yeah, it's the largest mall in North America. And here's the thing. Here's Canada. Here's Canada. I was on a city bus last night because I don't have a rental car while I'm here. The producer's taking me around, but I had a night off. I was going out to see some other comedians, and so I was on a city bus. When everybody gets off the bus, they say thank you to the bus driver. You never see that in the U.S. Like when you have a problem, like at the airport, there was a big problem with a flight. There was a mechanical failure. They had to get everybody off the plane. Everybody was getting back on a different flight. It was so calm, and they just took care of business. Nobody got angry. There was no fist fights. There was no yelling. It was amazing. I do like Canada. And so it's been really great. And they have the third largest mall in the world is here in Edmonton. And it's the largest in North America. It's bigger than Mall of America in Minneapolis, and that is my point. The large mall in Minneapolis, which is the biggest one in the U.S., they go, Mall of America, grandiose name, right? The largest mall in North America here in Edmonton is just called West Edmonton Mall. No grandiosity at all. But that's Canada. That's Canada for you. So I'm having a great time up here, and it's really fun staying in a little hotel that is right next to train tracks. Not everything is perfect in the life of a comedian on the road. So good chance that at some point during me talking here, you will hear a train go by in the background. Fortunately for me, I like trains, so it's not that big a deal. But here we are on episode number 161. Fun fact about the number 161. In the year 161, Marcus Aurelius, who is famous for his writings on Stoicism, of course, becomes the emperor of the Roman Empire. It was March 7th. I don't know how they know the exact date. That seems weird, but apparently it was March 7th, 161. He becomes the new emperor of the Roman Empire. And nowadays, we're mostly familiar with Marcus Aurelius through his writings on Stoicism, especially if you listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast, because he talks about it constantly. And it's good stuff. If you haven't read it, there's a lot of good life lessons in there that we can learn from the old Roman, you know? And that kind of plays into what we are doing today. So last week, we were talking Barbary piracy in North Africa way back in the 1700s. And now, today, we're going to fast forward. We're going to fast forward to 2012, and we are going to talk with Michael Scott Moore, who is the author of a book called The Desert and the Sea, about his nearly 3 years as a captive of Somali pirates. Real deal. Firsthand, guy actually went through this experience, and it's amazing. If you haven't read the book yet, I highly suggest you do. It's a I don't want to say it's an entertaining read. It's because that seems like a wrong adjective to place on it, but it is a fantastic book that you should absolutely go check out. It's called The Desert and the Sea. And of course, there'll be a link to that book in the show notes that'll pop you over to Amazon and help the show in the meantime, right? Amazon kicks me back a few shekels for those links, so I always appreciate it when you use them. If you are digging on the Somali piracy talk, definitely go back also to episode 135 for a completely different perspective on it when we talked to Jordan Wiley about his book, and he was a ship security officer fighting Somali pirates. So he was from the other end of things. So that's out there as well. And I get to go back to warmer climates next week. Yeah, it is cold here in Edmonton. Today it is a balmy 54, which is the warmest it's been since I got here. It was in the 30s when I got here, or whatever that is in Celsius for you Canadians. Celsius. People around here, they're like, it's 5. And I'm like, 5? It doesn't feel that cold. I don't know what's going on. I'm an American. We still use Fahrenheit. The other thing here that really weirded me out is their gas prices. And I don't know if this is just an Edmonton thing, because I don't remember seeing it this way when I was in Vancouver. But I looked at the price of a gas sign at one of the gas stations, and it said 112.9. And I was like, okay, well, I know it's liters and not gallons, but oh my God, is gas $112 per gallon or per liter here? That's insane. How does anybody afford to drive here? And so I was walking, and I went and looked at a gas pump, and it's in cents. They charge it. It's 112.9 cents. Obviously, they know how to use a decimal point. Why don't they just scoot it over a couple of places and make it more legible? 112 cents? That's bizarre to me. But anyway, so apparently gas is 112 cents per liter here, which puts it about the same price as it is in California per gallon. I figured that out. Use the calculator on my phone because technology, you know. But I get to go back to warmer climates coming up next week. On October the 25th, actually, I'll be here in Edmonton this weekend, whatever those dates are, Thursday through Saturday. I'll be back at the Comedy Factory here in Edmonton, doing some headlining shows there, working at the stuff. October the 21st, I can't even talk now. October the 25th, I'll be at Tilted Mash in Elk Grove, California, for you Sacramento folks headlining. It's going to be a great show. It is a stacked lineup. You guys are going to love it. Come on out for that one. October the 27th, I'll be at Vinny and Rosie's in Suisun City, California, headlining there. In between, I have to go to Reno to do a corporate gig for the California Groundwater Association. Yeah, that means I got to figure out how to write some groundwater jokes in the next week. That'll be an adventure. November the 2nd, I'll be at the Lucky Penny in Murphys, California. Great little town there. November 3rd, I'll be at the Bootleg Bar in San Francisco, California. And then it's off to even warmer climates. November the 7th, I'll be at the Flying X Saloon in Lake Havasu City, Arizona. 11/8, I will be at the Sundowner Saloon. That's in Kingman, Arizona. November 9 through 11, I will be at the Edgewater Casino in Laughlin, Nevada. Those are great shows. And then November 12th, I'll be at the Honda Casino in Pine Top, Arizona. And Oregon, Washington, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Florida, all that stuff is coming up. Go check out the tour dates. Go to underthecrossbones.com. Click on the tour dates button, and you can find out where I'm coming to tell jokes and sing songs near your face. We are sponsored today by S.R. Staley and Yellow Pine Publishing. S.R. Staley's back with the third book in the Pirate of Panther series called Calusa Spirits. And if you haven't read the first two books in the series, Pirate of Panther Bay and Tortuga Bay, first of all, you should. Second of all, you don't need to in order to understand what's going on in the third book. It's like when you find a really awesome album by a band and you go, oh, I never heard of this band before. And then you go back and you find out they got like 2 or 3 other albums. You can still go back and get those and still understand that album too. Did that with a band recently. I found a band I was really digging on, found out they had 10 albums out. Never heard of them before. Also, can't remember their name at the moment, but I'll figure it out later. Anyway, if you haven't read the old ones, go get the old ones. If you haven't read the new one, go get the new one. The new one is called Calusa Spirits, and in the book, Isabella, the main character, and her crew of pirates, they're on the run from pirate hunters dispatched from colonial Spain. Ooh, those dastardly Spaniards. And they're fighting for their lives off the coast of Cuba, where they make a run for safety up the west coast of Florida, and as they scavenge for food and water, they run into a rogue tribe of Calusa Indians, and the result is an epic battle of survival and identity in this action-packed pirate adventure of historical fiction set in the 1780s. And Calusa Spirits is out now. You can get it. Go to srstaley.com, head to the Amazon, do all that stuff. Click the link in the show notes, of course. It's all there. And it came out on September 19th. So you can go get it now. Go get Calusa Spirits by S.R. Staley. All right. And if you're enjoying the show, come join us over on Facebook, facebook.com/underthecrossbones, Twitter /undercrossbones. There's no the there. And of course, you can get all the show notes for this episode at underthecrossbones.com/161. If you're enjoying the show and you want to support, go to underthecrossbones.com/support. You can drop a donation there in the PayPal box, whatever amount you feel is appropriate. Click that Amazon banner there. It'll take you on over to buy yourself whatever you need, whatever you want, whatever you desire. And Amazon kicks me back a few pennies, and that makes everything helpful. Yeah, if you want to be a sponsor of the show, like S.R. Staley or Pirate Radio of the Treasure Coast or anything else we got going on here, you can also find out information about that there as well. All right, so we got a good long interview with Michael Scott Moore here. I'm gonna shut my face now, and we're all gonna listen to this interview. You are gonna love it. Michael Scott Moore this happened to him. He was a pirate captive in Somalia for almost 3 years, and he's going to tell us all about what that does to a person, and it's really amazing. So make sure you pick up his book, The Desert and the Sea, and let's do it. Here's Michael Scott Moore. Where to start with you is a giant question in my head. I just finished reading your book yesterday on a long flight back from a Midwest thing, and so your book is called The Desert and the Sea: 977 Days Captive on the Somali Pirate Coast. And one of the things that struck me while I was reading it, my own experience, was that I kept going, this would make an incredible fictional novel. And I had to keep reminding myself that this actually happened.
But it was real.
Now you're the guy. Yeah. Did you ever, since then, since writing the book and since talking about the book as much as you have, does it ever seem like a fictional thing, or does it still really hit home to you?
No, it's still really, really vivid to me, actually. So it doesn't seem fictional at all. It does seem distant. So, when I was in Somalia, my life in the West seemed like something on Mars, and kind of a distant memory. And Somalia does seem like that to me. It does seem a long way away from the way I live now, but that doesn't mean that the memories aren't there and very powerful.
Certainly. Now, remind us of the years that you were there.
From 2012 to 2014.
Okay, and so that is sort of the downward slope of that increase in Somali piracy, right?
Yeah, I think I must have traveled there right around the peak of Somali piracy. I went with another journalist, Ashwin Rahman, and we both thought it was a big story and would continue to be a big story for at least for a little while. I think 2011 was one of the biggest years, if not the biggest, for those pirate gangs, and it fell off sharply starting in 2012 and especially in 2013.
Right.
Which, by the way, I mentioned in The Desert and the Sea. I was listening to the news on the BBC while that happened, and I got that impression after I'd been a hostage for over a year, and I really felt stupid.
Like, not only were you not going to get the giant scoop, you also got stuck there, right?
You got stuck there until piracy was no longer a headline.
Yeah. Oh, that's really amazing. So you were captured, you were kidnapped in a way that we don't think about Somali pirates working, because we think about sort of the Captain Phillips story, and they're out there and it's three guys in a skiff trying to take down a larger ship. That was not really your experience at all. Can you give us that thumbnail sketch of how you were captured?
Yeah, my partner Ashwin and I had been there for about 10 days doing some fairly good reporting, actually. We learned quite a bit in central Somalia, especially around a town called Galkayo. And after we went out to the coast to interview some people in Hobyo, we thought the dangerous part was over. And Ashwin decided to go to Mogadishu, which was a slight change of plans and meant an extra trip to the airport. And we went to the airport on a Saturday and saw him off. He got onto the plane successfully, but on the way back, my car was waylaid by a technical, which is sort of a battle wagon in the Somali Civil War, a technical full of about 12 armed men. And yeah, they belonged to a pirate gang. I know that because after they pulled me out of the car, it was pretty violent. They stopped our car. They aimed the cannon from the technical, which is mounted in the flatbed of every thing that's called a technical. Mm-hmm. They aimed that through the windshield and stopped the car, overpowered my guards, and the 12 or so men came and yanked me out of the car. They beat me with their guns, and they bloodied my scalp and broke my wrist, and they bundled me into another SUV that was waiting off to the side, and we drove off into the bush. And after that, I was a hostage of pirates. And I know that because a few months later, they decided to place me on board a ship that the same gang had captured out on the ocean, a tuna longliner. And I knew there were pirates to start with, but I think someone at Slate ran a fairly hot take right after I was captured about how, because I was captured on land, they weren't technically pirates.
Right.
But this gang was certainly piracy was their business.
Is there a difference between a pirate and a terrorist in this case, or is that semantics?
No, it's not semantics. The U.S. government makes a very clear distinction, and so my case was categorized as a criminal case, which meant information about it could flow to my family a little more easily than, let's say, the James Foley case. James Foley was also kidnapped by terrorists during that same span of time. I only heard about him in Somalia after he got his head chopped off, but he was held by pirates. He was held by terrorists who wanted to make a point with his murder.
I see.
And I was held by pirates who only wanted to earn a bunch of money off my sorry hide.
I see. Okay. So did you ever come to any sort of conclusion? And there's some discussion of this in the book, but I'm wondering if anything else has occurred to you even since then about why they chose you. Was it were you sold out by the people around you, or was there something specific that they had about you that they wanted you particularly?
No, not me particularly. I think they probably wanted both me and Ashwin. So they were probably waiting for both of us on the way to the airport. And the reason I say that is that Ashwin seems to remember seeing a technical off in the distance when we went there. And we wound up taking a different route to the airport than we should have. And so this technical was probably just waiting for our car on the way back. And I think they were a little bit disappointed that there weren't two foreigners inside, two journalists. And I think they wanted us both because foreigners are worth money in Somalia. And they probably imagined that, first of all, that my family was rich because I was a Westerner. And they also imagined that Ashwin, since he was, who knows, Indian or Pakistani, they couldn't tell. He was born in India. That his family must have had some money too. That's the suspicion with all foreigners, I think, just because in Somalia things are so poor.
Yeah, and there seemed to be a profound lack of understanding of how much money, that amount of money that they were asking for actually is. Is it just because that they are so poor there that that the difference between 1 million and 20 million seems negligible to them just because even 1 million is an astounding amount of money?
Yeah, I think so. I think they don't really understand those amounts. Once the amounts are sort of thrown out there, they're happy to, dream up new ones. So, and they probably hear about billions and trillions of dollars on the radio being thrown around by Western governments, and so they fantasize about getting some slice of that. And they actually think that Western governments are happy to pay that too for their citizens. And one thing I learned that was very surprising to me is that my pirate gang, at least, had never even heard of the American policy of not paying ransoms for hostages.
Really?
We take that for granted. I mean, Americans in general hear it so often, and journalists in particular, when they go out in the field, they know that damn well. So it was really surprising to hear that somebody in the kidnapping business had never quite heard of that policy, and it's because they don't watch the same TV we do.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. Was there? Were you able to get any sense of how much experience those guys had? Now, obviously, the bosses and the upper echelon guys that you were dealing with were experienced, but some of the lower level guys that were guarding you on a daily basis, were they experienced with this stuff before, or were they kind of new to the game and wouldn't really know the difference?
My guards especially tried to claim they were just guards, but every now and then a story would slip out about being pirates out on the water. So two of the guys I talked to all the time, they both came up with stories about being out on the water. And I found that really interesting. If you question them, they try to say they're not pirates. So They try to keep away from that attack role as much as possible. And it's probably true that most of my guards were not in that original gang that attacked me, that original group of 12 or so men. So they could sort of distance themselves from the idea of being my kidnappers. But they certainly belonged to that gang, and they were certainly making money off my ransom, or stood to make money off my ransom. So I don't make that kind of a distinction, but they tried to, just to maintain their own innocence.
Yeah, I'm sure. It was interesting to read about the near labor strike that was kind of happening towards the end when they were considering going on strike. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, periodically I noticed that the bosses would come into the houses where I was being held. After I was held on the tuna vessel for several months, the pirates brought me on land and held me basically alone in a series of prison houses. And in these prison houses, every now and then a boss would arrive with a bundle of money, normally sort of rotten Somali bills. Somali has no central bank, so they haven't put out valid money in a while. So there are all these old bills that circulate that aren't worth very much, but the pirates would get a sort of pocket money from the boss, maybe every 2 months, in the form of these bills. And so then they could send out for some little bit of food or a little bit of, who knows, a comb or something like that. Not very much, but I think they stopped getting that pocket money towards the end. And about 2 or 3 weeks before I finally got out, one of the guards told me, after I was obviously despondent and upset about something, he said, in private, he said, "We're going to stop work if negotiations don't move this coming month." He meant September of 2014. The whole guard group was sick of it. They were tired of guarding me, and so they were going to try and send a message to the boss by going on strike, which was also a very risky and dangerous thing for them to do. And I didn't have any faith that would work, because I thought, well, if the boss gets tired of the guards, the boss can just fire them and put me in the hands of someone else, if they really want to. But as it turned out, 3 weeks later, I was free. I don't know if that was purely a function of the strike, but I think, but the experience on my mother's side, my family's side, was that the pirate negotiations dropped all of a sudden to an amount of money that was manageable.
Right. Because I think it ended up being $1.5 million at the end.
Yeah, about 1.6 million. Yeah.
Okay, and they had originally been asking for 20, which is a large
20,
difference. Yeah.
Exactly.
But even 1.5 is a whole lot of money to come up with for your mom, say. So there must have been other sources where that money came from besides your mother?
Oh, sure. No, I mean, she certainly didn't pay all that herself. The ransom came from family and friends, so that was the most immediate kind of fundraising she did, but also several magazines that I'd worked for, and a couple of institutions in the U.S. and Germany.
Interesting. Your mother is an astounding character in this whole thing because of the way that she kept her cool. I mean, I imagine she lost her cool at some point when you were not on the phone with her, but just the transcriptions of the phone calls with her, she seems like an amazingly cool player. Was she always somebody like that, or was this just a function of what was happening?
Oh, I think so. She's not a very dramatic person. She just sort of knows how to handle things. But she's also never been in the position of dealing with a crisis like this. I don't think that she was prepared to deal with that kind of pressure from day to day. I was surprised that she maintained this role as the negotiator, but once she was on the phone and once we called her, more or less by accident, the FBI decided that she was good on the phone and decided to keep her kind of in that role.
Yeah.
They also were really impressed by her. They said that she was obviously emotional, like any family member would be, but when it came time to actually talk on the phone to a pirate, she could switch it off and she could be very steely. And that seems very typical.
Interesting. Yeah.
For me, knowing my mother, that seems typical to me.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. Now, your childhood growing up in Southern California sort of plays into a lot of your mental state while you're over there as a captive. Which part of Southern California did you grow up in?
Around Los Angeles. So first in Northridge, which is in the San Fernando Valley, and then in Redondo Beach on the coast. Okay,
yes. And Redondo is nice. I don't think anybody outside of Southern California knows how profoundly boring Northridge can be.
That's true. It's like a Midwestern town right there in LA County.
Right. Yeah. And you have a lot of, you go through a lot of mental states where you're reflecting back on that. And sort of recapturing a love for that area or a love for your hometown, that kind of thing. Was that just because? Well, I don't exactly know what my question is here, but tell me about thinking about Northridge and thinking about Southern California while you're being held in a pirate house in Somalia.
Well, that's what I had time to do, and especially towards the beginning when I was first captured and I thought I was going to die, I think my mind started to cycle back through all these memories in a way that was almost desperate and sort of instinctive. So for the whole 2.5 years, I spent a good part of every day just remembering things. And sometimes I would actually get on a phase of my life and remember that in certain, at a certain level of detail for a few days. And then I would sort of finish that up and go off to something else. And which is one reason the book takes the form that it does. Uh-huh. And I had a lot to think about as far as my father went, because he committed suicide. And at some point after a year or so in Somalia, I started seriously to think about the same thing. Uh-huh. And I didn't like that idea, but I wrestled with it. So all those memories of my father, as well as Northridge, and Northridge good or bad, pretty or not pretty. It's not pretty, but it's not the worst place in the world,
certainly,
compared to Somalia. These things were, these were all things that were worth revisiting to me, because they were fundamental to my sense of self.
Uh-huh. As a sort of a reference, and being that you had done some journalism on the topic before going there, do you know what the average time a captive was held prisoner there? Or, just sort of a ballpark idea of maybe what you were expecting in your head when you were captured, of how long you'd be there?
Well, the time ranges wildly, just because I think Somalis are so erratic, or pirates are so erratic. I think I was thinking of the Chandlers, who were a British couple. They were held for about 1.5 years.
Okay.
When I was first captured, I did not want to be held for 1.5 years.
Sure.
I knew other seafarers had been held for 4, almost 5 years. And in fact, the crew of the ship that I was held on, the tuna vessel was called the Naham 3. That crew was held for almost 5 years in total. So that they almost, they almost set a record in terms of length of captivity. I did not expect it to be there more than 1.5 years. I mean, I was just horrified when it got to be a year.
Was there a change in your mental state at that time?
Yeah, around the year mark, I had no reason to think this, but I think I was just sort of optimistic that they would let me go then.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why I thought that, but they had stuck to this absurd demand of $20 million for so long. I thought somebody was just fucking with me, and they were just going to let me go after a year.
Uh-huh.
Nothing of the kind happened, and it pitched me into a deep depression after that. In about January of 2013, I was in really bad shape.
What kind of coping mechanisms did you use to, one, not kill yourself, but two, just to get through on a daily basis of what, just had to be a profound amount of boredom? Yeah. Sitting there in a pirate house. What kind of mental tricks did you use, or just mechanisms did you use to maintain a semblance of sanity?
Well, since I'm a writer, writing always helped. So if I had pen and paper, then jotting something down always helped. Normally, at first I tried to write about what was going on and take notes, but then those notes got confiscated, and the pirates got annoyed about what I was going to write. So I went for about 1.5 years with no pen and paper, and I just had to sort of compose in my head. I thought about some books I'd left unfinished in Berlin, and I revised them in my head and composed whole new paragraphs, and then memorized them, and made that sort of a discipline for every morning to go through these passages that I'd just come up with, and then maybe refine them and then rememorize them. And that can keep your mind occupied. And so eventually I had a routine of 2 or 3 hours every morning. That would help keep my mind. It was something to look forward to. And you could just lie there and do that in silence. When I finally did get a pen and paper again, for the third time after having my nose confiscated a couple of times, I started to write a novel. So that really helped. That was a sort of escapist discipline. And doing yoga helped. I actually asked for a mat so that I could do yoga on the filthy floor. And that was crucial somehow. I still don't understand exactly what happened, but there was something about yoga that could keep my mood sort of above the waterline in Somalia. Meaning, I could keep myself from getting so desperate that I really would have done something drastic.
That is probably the best sales pitch for yoga I've ever heard.
I'm not even an experienced yogi.
I mean, coming out of that, having done all that, did you find that your memory was better, or do you still practice yoga, or was there anything there that you didn't do before you were captured that you still do now?
I don't know. I think my memory's always been pretty good. I don't still do exercises like that or anything, but I just sort of let it be. But there is something about hope that I managed to negotiate that probably changed me for good. And I don't think I would have quite realized this until I wrote about it in the book. But for at least the first year, I kept hoping I would get out soon. Kept hoping I would get out, at the latest at this year deadline or whatever it was. And the pirates tried to keep up my hope too. And it turns out keeping up your hope is no way to survive something like that.
Right.
Because you hope you're going to get out in 2 weeks, like the pirates say, or you're going to get out in a month. And you're stupid enough to believe them. And then after a month, your hopes are dashed and you feel absolutely rotten. I mean, actually worse than before. So that cycle is something that I had to learn to escape from, actually detach myself from. And that's the only way I managed to keep my emotions on some sort of an even keel. I had to learn to live without hope. And, in America, we like to think about the future. And now that I'm back, I realize I don't that much anymore. Of course, you make plans and that sort of thing, but you don't live for something that's coming up. And I had to learn not to do that in a very strict way in Somalia.
In your description of that, it sounds like the first word that comes to mind is resignation. But when you put it in the context of that, even now you don't think about the future as much. It doesn't seem like resignation. That seems more like living in the moment. And I guess those are the same thing depending on what the context and your surroundings are.
Well, no, living in the moment is not necessarily resignation. It was certainly not resignation in the sense that I made a decision every day to live. Mm-hmm. So I decided to go on living, even though at some point after year 2 or something, I really did not think I was going to see my family and friends again. I thought about all the options and realized that there were planes flying overhead and that there was probably, a possibility that somebody was going to come get me with guns. I mean, like a SEAL team, and that I would possibly die if that happened. So, and then there was a good chance that I would just die of neglect, die of disease. My immune system was starting to break down towards the end too. So, it was not a definite thing that if I just stayed alive, I would get out. But I made, after a few sort of very drastic mental adjustments, I made that conscious decision to live every day without particular hope for the future. And that means living in the moment. You're right. It was resignation to being a captive. And I was certainly living in a muted way while I was there. And it took a while to come out of that when I went free. But it's not exactly the same thing as resignation.
As I was finishing your book yesterday on a plane home from a very long week-long comedy festival, and I was working on very little sleep, and I was reading and kind of dozing off and reading and dozing off, and I realized I'd missed the snack service on my Southwest flight, and I got very irritated with myself. I was like, I missed the snacks, and then I went back into your book, and I'm like, I'm an idiot. Why am I worrying about a bag of pretzels? And so it's interesting to read your experience in that, because it makes me go, okay, don't worry about the bag of pretzels. Don't worry about that stupid junk. Kind of focus on the more important stuff.
Right.
And so
Exactly.
since you've been back, what have you found changed in the way, not only not looking towards the future, but what have you found changed in the way that you go through your daily life and work on projects? Because I imagine you have other projects you're working on now. Tell me about how that part changed you.
If I get frustrated, I have this 2 years and 8 months of horror to sort of look back on, and remind myself to be grateful, because that was the first thing I felt when I got out, was just intense gratitude that everyone had worked for my release and done so much to get me out. And like I said, I wasn't even sure I was going to live.
Sure.
So at this point, it's just gratitude to be alive. And if I forget that, which is very easy to do in the West, I have this sort of pit of experience that I can return to. And so that helps. It's not very pleasant, but it helps.
Yeah, I'm sure. It was, tell me a little bit about what happened when you came back. Now, that was the other thing I was going to ask. When you were hearing the drones and the planes overhead and things like that, and they were moving you around quite a bit because they were also hearing those drones and planes.
Yeah.
Do you know how much of that actually kind of was looking for you, and how much of that was just something else entirely?
Probably most of it, because the Galkayo airport, we were always, after the ship, I was always held in Galkayo in various houses. And we heard airport traffic all the time. But the Galkayo airport has no lights. So if I heard an aircraft at night, it was almost certainly something looking for me. Just because what else would it be? There weren't normally planes flying over that part of the world. And if they did, they kept their distance. They would be a high airliner that you wouldn't hear necessarily. So if we heard something, it was, first of all, it was probably a surveillance ship, a surveillance plane, and it probably wanted to be heard by us. So in other words, you can certainly watch a house without notifying the people inside.
Sure.
And the stuff that there were few mysterious noises, but the most common ones that I remember were a very low-flying, circling large plane, which could have been something close to an Orion, and a drone. I mean, a sort of weird hum coming close to the house. And those scared the shit out of the pirates. And I could tell from their reactions that they thought those were American aircraft. I know in the meantime that the Navy was certainly keeping tabs on me. I don't know if they knew where I was all the time, but I think they did most of the time. So obviously nobody tells me details. Everybody knows I'm a journalist, so they don't tell me details. But I don't know for sure on a given day what was what. But I think certainly some of the instincts we had about who was looking for us overhead were pretty close to the truth.
Okay. Do you know why then they didn't send in a SEAL team, for instance, to come and get you?
No, I didn't. And before I went, I should say I never assumed that would anything like that would happen, because Somalia has been almost a no-go zone for the U.S. military since Black Hawk Down, with a few important exceptions. And so I certainly didn't think anyone was going to come in for a journalist who got himself kidnapped. But 4 days after I did get kidnapped, there were two other Western hostages in Somalia that did get rescued by a SEAL team. One American, Jessica Buchanan, and her Danish colleague. And that learning about that in the first couple of months gave me a little bit of hope. I thought, well, now they've set a precedent. I mean, they've also done something really violent that scared the shit out of my pirates. So it's possible it won't happen again real soon. But that's sort of set a new precedent for the American presence and behavior in Somalia. So I thought it was possible. So it started to be on my mind. And why it didn't get called in, I don't know. I mean, these things everything has to line up perfectly, because otherwise you don't want SEALs going in without perfect intelligence.
Sure.
They don't want to do it. They're happy to do their jobs, but they want everything else to be lined up. So if it's not lined up, then we shouldn't do it. And I was there in the under the Obama administration. I think Obama was a cautious president, so he was probably a little bit conservative about those things.
Interesting. Tell me about what happened initially when you got home, that experience of now being back in the modern world and what that was like.
Right. That was a huge adjustment. I mean, obviously I hadn't dealt with, my life up to then had been so shrunken, that living in the West all of a sudden, where everything was possible and all sorts of people were around who I loved and who I could talk to, it was sort of very difficult to navigate all that. It was hard to be in a room with too many people at once because I wasn't sure how to communicate anymore. I had been communicating for a couple of years with just pirate guards who didn't mean me very well, and we had a very brutal, simple way of talking to each other, a kind of mixture of Somali and English, that it left no room for interpretation. But when you're back in your own country, or I was in Germany, which is also one of my own countries. I'm a German citizen, and speaking a language that there are all kinds of overtones and things. People find ways of saying things and meaning something else, and that kind of thing. And all when they mean you, the best of everything. And that was a very complicated thing to get used to again. And so I didn't have a coming home party for a couple of weeks because I couldn't be in a room with too many people at once.
That makes sense. There's a lot of us that don't like being in a room full of people in general.
Anyway.
What was the first thing you ate when you came back? Because you were talking about writing recipes and things in your notebooks there. What did you eat when you came back?
Right. Well, as soon as I landed in Kenya, so Nairobi was the first place I went to after leaving Somalia altogether. A pilot flew me from Galkayo to Mogadishu, and then from Mogadishu we went to Nairobi. The first thing I asked for was a beer. And the guy who owned the house, who happened to be a German, said that he had stocked the fridge with German beer because he said anytime anyone gets out of captivity, if they're male, they ask for a beer. And for some reason I didn't ask him what the women ask for. It sounds like women are just more creative, but I think I don't remember exactly what the first thing I ate was, the next morning or whatever. Yeah. I do remember having a hamburger almost the first day, a Kenyan hamburger. So, had some, it was a good hamburger. It just had some funny sauce on it.
Okay.
You're right. I did write those recipes in my notebook, and I cooked a few of them when I got back to Berlin. That took a couple of days, but the main thing that I actually got addicted to was beef and kidney stew. For absolutely no reason, I wrote down a recipe for beef and kidney stew based on having eaten it once in Britain. I certainly never cooked it and didn't know what the ingredients were. And I wrote down what I thought might be good in a beef and kidney stew. And up till then, I was never a creative cook or anything like that. But just the hunger in Somalia was forcing me to think about in very, very careful detail about these meals that I would like to have. And it turns out my recipe for beef and kidney stew was almost perfect. And so I cooked that several times when I got back. And I liked it. I needed protein to recover. So the protein and the iron, I think my body was actually, calling out for these things while I was in Somalia. So that explains some of the recipes.
Yeah. And I imagine you have no appetite for boiled goat over pasta.
No, boiled goat. I don't need boiled mutton ever again in my life. At least if it has no flavor. I mean, they didn't flavor it with not even salt. So I don't need boiled goat, and I don't need canned tuna ever again in my life.
Yeah, that was the other one, right?
Yeah.
That's really amazing. It was so great to read the stories at the end of you going to visit Raleigh in the Seychelles and meeting up with the guys from the fishing boat and things like that.
Yeah.
How were those things sort of orchestrated? Did somebody reach out to you and say, "Hey, these guys are coming back," or did you find out about it and say, "I need to be there"? I mean, Raleigh got back before you did, but so I imagine that was you making.
Yeah, exactly. Rolly got out after only about a year. He and his friend Mark were sprung long before I was, and I think Rolly's family heard about me when I got out, so they saw some headlines, and then they found me on Facebook. And within 24 hours of coming back to Berlin, so within the first 3 or 4 days of my release, I got a message from Rolly's daughter in the Seychelles, and she said who she was, and it was so incredible to me that somebody like that would reach out to me on Facebook. I didn't believe her. I mean, I actually asked her a couple of questions just to verify who it was, which also indicates how paranoid I was when I got out.
Sure.
And it was fantastic. It was obviously great. And as soon as I could, I went to Italy. It took probably a year and a half or so. I didn't see him until, I guess, 2015. Late 2015. And with the guys from the Naham 3, when I went to visit Rolly from Berlin in the Seychelles, the men from the Naham 3 were still a topic of discussion. So in other words, they were still captive after about 4 years. And it took another year for them to get out. And I kept careful track of their case. So in other words, I found the people who were negotiating the case, and I even helped a little with the ransom fund. But once those guys got sprung, I got an email, I think with like 48 hours notice, saying Nairobi now. And so I had to get on a plane from Berlin to Nairobi, which is not terribly far. There was a law office in London that was doing some pro bono work, and they paid for me to go. And that was really terrific to see those men go free in Nairobi, because they had suffered so much.
Sure.
And they weren't expecting to see a familiar face. So they were surrounded by people who also meant them well, but who they didn't know, And they had this long voyage from central Somalia to Nairobi. And they came out of the airport terminal, and one of them recognized me. I tapped him on the shoulder, and he started to shout, and then everyone started to shout, and it was a great reunion.
That's so joyous. I guess is the proper word.
No, it was fantastic. Yeah.
Did you come back thinking, I've got to write a book about this experience, or was that something that came along later? And how long did it take you to be able to start to put that stuff down on paper?
Yeah, I knew I would write a book once I knew I was alive. Once I realized I was going free, I knew I was going to write a book. But I had given up on getting out alive several months before. So while I was there, I was no longer trying to take careful notes or anything like that. Like I said, I was working on a novel instead. And if I really needed to note something down, I wrote about it in German in the corner of the page or something. But I knew that taking notes about what was going on was the best way to get those notes confiscated.
Yeah.
So when I did get out and turned out to be alive, I just hoped that I had enough in my head that I could remember enough for a book. And it turns out that I had more than enough in my head. All those scenes were still so vivid. But I went through the story first with the FBI. So the FBI in the German version, the BKA, they debriefed me for like 3 weeks when I got back to Berlin. So I gave them basically the first draft. And then, a few months later, I sat down to write the book, and I wrote to them and said, "Is there a transcription of what I said?" They said, "Yes, but you can't have it."
Oh, no.
So going through it once helped keep some of those memories alive. And then I did write a summary of it for the Guardian in 2015, which formed sort of a kernel for the book. And then I sat down to write the book right around the same time, the middle of 2015, in a disciplined way. And it took me about 2.5 years, I think.
Did the process of mentally reliving and writing about those experiences change the way that you viewed the pirates at all?
I'm not so sure it did. I knew exactly how I felt about the pirates. And of course, I got along with some of them better than others. I did make a point of writing them, as people, and so you have to sit there with a certain amount of sympathy while you're doing that on the page. But I make my feelings clear throughout the book. The feelings are sometimes very complicated.
Certainly.
I don't know if what I thought or what I felt actually changed, but putting everything down made me very well acquainted with all that material, which just means I can talk about it now in a way that I wouldn't have been able to when I first got out. It was just so much in your head. And also a whole lot of anger and emotion that you're sitting on in the rest of your body.
Yeah.
That there was no way to talk about it fluently until I had actually set it down on paper. So it made me acquainted with the material in a way that in some sense, I wasn't when I first got out.
Huh. So being that this show, for the most part, we deal with the historical and pop culture version of pirates. Mm-hmm. How did you? Are those two completely different things in your head now, or do you see Captain Morgan ad and see some connection there? I don't know how I would reconcile those two things if it were me.
Yeah, no, there's absolutely a connection. I mean, that's one reason I wanted to do the book. But when I went to Somalia, nobody was trying to put Somali pirates into a historical context and make them understandable in the history of piracy, which goes back to the ancient Greeks, if not before.
Sure.
So I thought when I started working on this pirate story, I was struck by the fact that modern politicians would say, well, these are pirates, but don't think of Captain Morgan, or don't think of a sort of swashbuckler on the Caribbean when you think of Somali pirates, because these guys off Somalia are mean. Well, those guys in the Caribbean were mean too.
Yeah.
And in fact, I thought that there were probably a whole lot more historical parallels than people like to think. Just because Somali pirates don't dress up like French, déclassé French noblemen from the 17th century or something like that, doesn't mean that they don't have a lot in common. What they do have in common is that they were rebels against the established order, and that's one reason we romanticize pirates now, because they're not symbols of something bloody or dangerous anymore to us. And in fact, piracy disappeared more or less for over 200 years from the world's oceans. I mean, before the U.S. Navy on its first mission abroad quelled Barbary piracy on the Mediterranean, piracy on the high seas was considered just a fact of life.
Sure.
And of course, there have been some incidents ever since. It's not like it's gone away for good, but an identifiable region where piracy was really a big danger had not cropped up again in over 2 centuries until Somali piracy came up off East Africa. So that was really interesting to me. And these guys are rebels against a sort of established order in a way that is likely to make future generations romanticize them for some reason, And so I hope my book will be kind of a counterweight to that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's one of the things that I've always found a little bit bizarre about pirate fandom in general, is that these guys were cutthroats and murderers and slave traders and all this kind of stuff, but they were, now we think of them as freedom fighters and rebels and that kind of stuff, and also either heroic or comedic characters when you take somebody like Johnny Depp into account. And that was one of the earliest bits I used to do in my comedy shows. What was, in 200 years, Disneyland's going to have a ride called Gangbangers of the Compton. And, where we're romanticizing these criminals essentially. And so I'm picturing in my head 200 years from now, in whatever form of entertainment we have, we're going to have some, comedic, vaguely femme and drunken Somali pirate running around.
Very possible. Yes, it's very possible. And in fact, I think I might want to write an essay about going to the Pirates of the Caribbean again at Disneyland. I haven't yet done that, but I might do that. They just changed that ride. There was one part of the scenery there where pirates chase women around and actually auction them off. And they changed that. I don't know why they changed that. I guess they didn't want, kids of the current generation are too sensitive to see stuff like that. But it's not a good role model for anybody.
Right.
But piracy and human trafficking go hand in hand.
Right.
And so that might make a good essay, I think.
Yeah, and I think their decision to do that, because I mean that was obviously a huge topic of discussion among the pirate fandom when that happened, and I think it was more Disney just trying to cover themselves and stay out of trouble, rather than create a teachable moment or a discussable moment in a theme park ride, which I think in some ways would have been better. But I also, I can see where they're coming from. They still have shareholders too.
Yeah, the other thing is that was the scenery in that ride is a result of the sense of humor of a bunch of animators from the or designers from the 1950s,
sure,
1950s and 60s. So that's is sort of outdated in that sense, I guess. But
yeah,
I don't know. I have to write it again before I have to go through there again before I pass judgment.
Yeah, certainly. And if you do write something about it, I would love to see that, because that has always been there's always been a bedrock of my thinking on this whole thing, is just how bizarre the whole deal is. But so now that you've got this book out and it's doing what you've written it, you're out there, you're talking about it. Do you get to mentally compartmentalize that after this process and move into something new? Does it become even a little more distant than it was before?
That's a good question. Does it become more distant? I mean, it's not. It's very present. In some sense, it's a way of not compartmentalizing it. It's a way of not putting it away and making sure that I have that sort of fluency with it, and that I can go easily back and forth, because it's no good to put it away in the closet as if it didn't happen. It did happen. So that's the point of the book, and that's the point of talking about it. But obviously, I want to be able to write about other things.
Sure.
So that's one great benefit of being done with the book, is that I can work on something else.
Right. And so what do you have planned? What is the next thing you're going to do?
I'm working on that novel I started in Somalia.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because I was going to say, it almost seems like this is a hard act to follow. When you can't follow yourself, it makes it a little bit difficult to figure out what to come up with next. But that makes a nice fluid chain, I guess, of events.
We'll see. I hope so.
Yeah. Where's the best place online for people to keep up with what you're doing and your projects and find out more about you?
My website is at radiofreemike.net.
Okay, great. And I'll make sure that is in the show notes, and links to the book and all that kind of good stuff. This has been really fantastic, Michael. I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Great discussion.
And there it is, friends. That is my interview with Michael Scott Moore, author of The Desert and the Sea. How amazing is that story? I think we can all learn a lot from that, and I think it puts a lot of things in perspective, and it's something that, certainly as pirate fans, I think we should know the current realities of what's going on there as well. That was there was a lot of times in that interview where I did not know what to say next, simply because I was kind of thrown by the things that he was telling me. So his website, if you want to find out more about that, is radiofreemike.com. I'm sorry, .net, radiofreemike.net. Go check that out. Go get the book, The Desert and the Sea. Like I said, if you're interested in this angle on piracy, episode 135 with Jordan Wiley is a different take on it. Jordan Wiley was a ship security agent, a hired gun in the most literal sense to fight Somali pirates on merchant vessels in that area of the world. So you can check that out as well. We are sponsored today by Pirate Radio, The Treasure Coast, playing the best music of today's hits and yesterday's classics, and Pirate Radio Talk, playing the best pirate shows, including Under the Crossbones, 24/7, all commercial-free. To listen, just go to pirateradio.thetreasurecoast.com or download the Pirate Radio WKKC-DB app in your favorite app store. That's the music station. Or for the talk station, go to pirateradiotc.com or download the Pirate Radio Talk, or just yell at your Android phone or your Alexa. Go, hey, Alexa, hey, Google, and it will, and you can ask it, play Pirate Radio The Treasure Coast, play Under the Crossbones. It'll do that for you, because technology. And that is our show for today, kids. Thank you once again for tuning in. I super duper appreciate it every single week when you do. If you want to find out more about Michael Scott Moore, go to radiofreemike.net and definitely go pick up his book, The Desert and the Sea. There'll be a link to it in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon and support the show in the process. And that was an amazing show. Next week, we're going to have a bit of a palate cleanser. It's been real serious around here the last couple of weeks, talking about all this Barbary pirates and deep history and North African Somali pirates. We need a little palate cleanser next week. So next week, we're going to talk to Captain Alex Piccolo, who's the creator of Pirate Theater on YouTube, which is a new YouTube series about pirate history and facts and debunking some myths and things like that. So it's a really fun show. We talk about a whole bunch of stuff. It's a fun interview. These are great interviews, and these are interesting interviews, but we're going to do a fun interview next week, which is also great and interesting. All right? I should probably just shut up now. I'm going to go to the mall. All right? I'll see you guys next week.